I just got back. I got back on Saturday. It was 15 days of crazy, so much fun, weirdest start to the school year and the weirdest pandemic year ever. But I'm back. I'm back home now, and I kind of want to do it again at some point.
Yeah. I want to too. If I can get my husband okay with hang out with a 3-year-old and a new puppy without me, I'll be
Which
like,
is a
bye.
whole other conversation about the new puppy. But
Oh yeah,
we'll
we didn't even talk
do
about that
that.
yet.
Very
Um,
excited.
yeah, it sounds awesome. So we wanted to talk today because you visited the last leg of your trip. You visited a lot of, or kind of like more civil rights era
Right.
stuff. So what did you see?
I came back through as I was coming back into the South. I wanted to make sure I stopped and spent some time in Memphis. I wanted to go to the Lorraine Motel, which is where Martin Luther King was assassinated, and they have built the new Civil Rights Museum, or a Civil Rights Museum. It's probably not new anymore, but the Civil Rights Museum is part of the Lorraine Motel. So it's like they've recreated the Lorraine Motel, or I guess kept it the same as it was on the day that King was assassinated. I didn't go in the museum because of COVID, but I did go to the motel, um, took some pictures, did some video of that moment, and as I left Memphis, I was like, as I was kind of walking around, there was also, I passed just around the corner. There's a site of the Memphis massacre in the 1860s, I think,
I just thought about that.
1870s, and I mean, it was just around the corner from the Civil Rights Museum, and it sort of reiterated the fact that, man, this city has had so much pain, and cities in the South. I mean, I tend to associate Memphis with King getting assassinated, but prior to that, it was this massacre, during and after the Civil War and Reconstruction, and it just reminded me of how sort of drawn out the civil rights struggle is, and still is still ongoing, but it's not just a one moment in time history.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because literally last week in my on level U.S. history class, we're going through a really quick review of the first half of U.S. history, and we spent a whole day on Reconstruction because I was like, I legitimately think to understand modern social justice issues that Reconstruction is like the 10 or 12 most important years you could study, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's exactly when it's like we had an opportunity. I don't know how we would have done it successfully, but we had an opportunity to try to, like, I don't know, have some honest conversations and really figure out how to move forward, but then we didn't. And yeah, I mean, I was talking to them about, we looked at the New Orleans kind of riots where the black men were going to vote on the new constitution and then were attacked. And then Memphis, if I'm correct, wasn't it, there were like black Union soldiers still in Memphis to protect the freed men there, right?
Yeah.
And then it was like an altercation between them and police officers, white police officers, I think, in Memphis.
And again, it just the idea of the black community and the police community, that history. I was talking about this last week with my classes too, that is not a recent thing, and it's not a new thing, and when we talk about civil rights in America, it doesn't start with Dr. King in the 1950s. It goes back, and even the fact that the very first police forces in America were slave recapture squads. That's kind of the history. There's just this deep embedded history of a fractured relationship between kind of the policing agencies and blacks in America, and it's not going to be anything that we can solve or fix easily.
Yeah, it's
And
like they
and with,
both were created almost in opposition to each other. Like,
right,
and that's not, we're not saying that like today that's how they want to be built, but
right,
it's like when they were built, it was built for this purpose to be. And this is the other thing is I have my kids read the 13th Amendment. Like we read the 13th Amendment, I'm like, what's in here that's really important? Which is like, right, we abolish slavery except in conditions of servitude, or I mean, except in as punishment for a crime. And it's like when you realize that, I mean, this whole stereotype today of like the black male criminal is
right.
that's success. That's success for the system. That's what they were trying to do in the late 1800s. They were like, well, we can't put him back on a plantation as an enslaved person, but if they're in prison, we could then hire them out to, I mean, it's really crazy.
It helps you. I mean, it doesn't solve anything, but it helps you understand kind of the deep-seatedness of racial issues in America today when we realize we're just not talking about something that happened last month or whatever. It goes back so much longer.
Let me ask, and I didn't give you advance notice that we were going to talk about this, but now that you're saying this, I'm wondering. So there's all this controversy now about certain states incorporating the 1619 Project into their costumes. Have you heard about this?
I've heard about the controversy.
Yeah. So, okay, I used the 1619 Project in my U.S. history classes. Like, I assigned them some of the podcast episodes, some of the essays. They're really amazing. I also do it, and then I show them the historical debate, because there is some legitimate issues with, like, some historians say, well, you go a little too far in some of your ultimate declarations, but, like, 95% of it is really good. But now there's this whole thing, I think the White House is like investigating whether, because I think the state of California is now incorporating it into their public schools. And it's like, to me, it just seems like, yeah, we've just always had this issue of like, especially as history teachers, like it shouldn't be a political act to talk about the history of slavery or the Black experience, right?
Well, and that's the thing, that the fact that it has become political to try to study the history is saddening to me. Mm-hmm. I don't ever want to tell a kid how to think. I don't ever want to tell a kid that they should think a certain way or they shouldn't think a certain way. That I want to present all the information so they have the ability. I mean, the whole idea that I have the ability as a teacher to indoctrinate my students.
Yeah.
That to me, I'm like, have you met 16-year-olds? they
don't listen to me.
Yeah, they don't listen to me. I can't indoctrinate anybody. And it reminds me of like Nazi Germany, when teachers had to take loyalty oaths, and teachers could be fired if they were teaching a certain way. And that idea that I get that we have influence, but to think that I can indoctrinate kids, that's insulting to kids. It's like they have the ability to think for themselves. At 16 years old, I guarantee you they have the ability to decide for themselves. My job is to present the information. By not including stuff that is ugly in our history, I think is disingenuous. It goes against what I'm supposed to do as a teacher.
Well, it's like, that's indoctrinated. Like, that's the thing, is like, well, now you are indoctrinating them to a different reality. It's like, because I remember even the state of Texas a few years ago, when the College Board came out with their new AP US history standards, right? The state of Texas was like, these promote anti-American values and blah, blah, blah. And they were like, they don't even mention the founding fathers. And it was like, yes, they did. But they did. I read through the whole thing, and then I wrote a letter to the state legislature that got thrown in a trash can somewhere. But it was like, because we were emphasizing people of color and other experiences that weren't the dominant narrative. And so it's just annoying to me because it's like, well, if you say then, well, you're talking too much about slavery. I'm like, well, that's a viewpoint then too. You're trying to indoctrinate kids into this like just super rags to riches American dream sort of narrative. And it's got to be somewhere in the middle. Like, so...
To think that you can study American history without studying slavery is an incomplete study of American history. It is a part of our nation's history, and we have to acknowledge it. We have to talk about it. I'm reminded of Germany. I had a German foreign exchange student years ago who told me that they studied, and I asked him, I was like, what do y'all cover in terms of World War II? What does that look like? And he said that, at least back then, which was probably 10, 15 years ago, that they spent 2 years in school studying 1919 to 1939. I'm sorry, a year and a half, studying 1919 to 1939. And then they spent a semester studying 1939 to 1945.
Yeah.
And he said the German education system was so intent on making sure that their students knew the history. How did Hitler come to power? what allowed Hitler to come to power, because it didn't happen out of the vacuum. What was going on within the German people that they elected him, that they chose him, because they want everybody to be educated. And I think that's where, as America, we've fallen short. We keep trying to deny that these bad things happened in our country because somehow that's un-American. And yet, when we include it, when we teach it, when we present all of the options and remind kids, yeah, this is ugly and this is what we did as a country and this is what we supported and it's not okay, but we can learn from that and we can make sure that we don't do that going forward. I think that's how we better ourselves.
And I think it's one of I've just been having these conversations with my kids because, you know, like you said, they're smart and it's like they know when you're not telling them something. They hear the news, maybe through osmosis, but they hear what's being talked about out there. And so they want to know. And to me too, it's like, if you're worried about a history teacher indoctrinating your kid, this is probably going to get me in trouble somewhere, but I'm like, okay, if my kid had to be indoctrinated by someone, I'm like a highly educated teacher. I'm like, okay, fine. I mean, I don't know. It's like they're indoctrinated by their peers, by their parents, by what they see on TV and Instagram celebrities. I'm like, okay, God forbid they get a little bit of wisdom from people whose job it is to teach kids.
And it's another source of information.
Yeah. And this is interesting to me because, like, and we're going off on a tangent, but I don't even care. I love this. Is that, like, so my first teaching job was at an Islamic school in Austin. So all my students were Muslim. The vast majority of the staff were Muslim, and obviously all the parents. And the vast majority of the kids were either they were born in a Muslim country or their parents were. So it was a very, like, kind of either first generation or second generation. And, you know, I had like 8th grade U.S. history then, and we were talking about the Constitution, and that was the year that we were debating like legalization of marijuana. They were debating same-sex marriage becoming legal, and I just remember thinking like, I can't not talk to them about this because like I understood it was going to make parents uncomfortable, right? Because, you know, depending on how you read the Quran, right, it basically says that being gay is not a thing you should do. Not all students ascribe to that, but still. And I just remember, like, the argument I made was exactly what you're saying. I'm like, look, they're going to live in this world. Like, they're living here. They're hearing about it. They at least need to know. They can ultimately decide whatever they want, but they at least need to know what's being said. Otherwise, they're just walking around blind. Like, they have no idea. So, yeah, I'm amazed I didn't get fired. I mean, it was an amazing school. I had a great, but I think back, I was a first-year teacher, so I just did stuff. I had no team, no textbook. I was like, yeah, let's just talk about Israel-Palestine with a bunch of 6th graders. And, like, yeah. I'm amazed I made it through. God bless that school. But, anyway. Okay, well, yeah, I think that's a good starter to then what we also wanted to talk about, which is a few key points kind of in the civil rights movement, including, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about Emmett Till, who is someone that I sort of by choice have not dived deep into that story. I know what I need to know to teach it, and I on purpose have maybe avoided. And then I also want to talk about John Lewis, and I know you and I both know some stuff about him. But yeah, so I guess that's our nice little intro and why we need to talk about this stuff. Okay, to lighten the mood a tiny bit, I'm going to make a comparison to The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, which is that there was that episode of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air where Carlton and Will are driving their dad's friend's really expensive car, and they get pulled over, and then they have this whole debate about why they got pulled over, right? And it's like Carlton, who's grown up in Bel-Air, is like, no, they just thought we were lost. And Will's like, no, I know exactly why we got pulled over, right? It's that distinction. But yeah, I just think,